to get masses of metal and magnetics moving. Very important. Now, what happens when you bring a magnetized, you have four elements. The inner element could be a rare earth, has to be a rare earth. That's your electron reservoir. Then you have an insulator of any kind of plastic material, polymer material. Professor Searle was using nylon back in the 40s, and the SEG was first built in 1946 at British Rewinds in London. Now we use Teflon for this layer. Without that, pulses will just build up and then dissipate, build up and then dissipate. Instead of having electrons released continuously, you have electron flow. This layer, third layer, is your magnetized layer. That's your electron accelerator. Then you have a copper or aluminum outer layer as a paramagnetics layer. So when you bring a magnetized iron layer, see, all these segments are the same. You have each unit is a separate little generator in itself. Think of the Brewster Palmer drive or system. Neodymium, magnetic layer, it's iron, magnetized, and copper. So what's happening is the magnetic coil that you use to magnetize the iron layers is just a regular DC coil wound with one turn of AC on the outside. Very, very important to understand what's happening, because that forms all these little pinpricks of magnetism, north-south, 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 going all the way around. And you have, what happens is you have a sine wave. Whoops, let me go back to that. You have a sine wave going one way on the plate and a cosine going the other way on the runner. At 90 degrees they intersect. You get the equivalent of a two-phase motor. And with electron flux coming off the neodymium being accelerated through each of these lighter elements, that also is a motoring effect. So these rollers or runners are carried along in the troughs of this wave, which runs all around. When you bring a rotor or a rotor magnet set, and they're made up of normally 8 stacked discs. The runners are carried along in the troughs of these sine waves, like an Archimedes water screw. So you have an electron collector, and it collects electrons. The thing about rare earths and neodymium, they have extra electrons in their 4 and 5F band shells. Professor said, all this lovely energy, we want electrons to move. Nobody's using it. Well, in this configuration, it's used. So we have a collector of a rare earth. Neodymium is the cheapest rare earth, and rare earths are not rare. There's mountains of them, places all over the world. You just have to know where to look. So you have a collector, neodymium, rare earths greedily suck up and readily emit electrons. It's a great thing about rare earths. And they won't run out. The universe replaces them, because again, what is vacuum? Pre-electrons. Vacuum is pure energy. You must remember that always. More energy than we can imagine. That's what vacuum is. It isn't nothing. Nature abhors a true vacuum. So, your rare earth, neodymium, your insulator, your accelerator of electrons is magnetized, and your paramagnetics layer. That causes eddy currents between the plates and the runners, so they float over the plate magnets, and no matter what speed they go at, they never fly off. The faster they go, the more the magnetic traction is increased. So, collector, neodymium, gate, Teflon, accelerator, permanent magnetic material, and emitter, copper. Keeping an eye at time here, it goes really fast. There's the field lines of magnetic force. Now, there's a magnetic mock-up unit that we've demonstrated. Called a single plate and runner gyrocell. That tells us what voltage we need to get everything moving. And it's a very low voltage. It's only about 1.5 volts at 600 milliamps. That's about 4 batteries connected in parallel for normal alkaline batteries. And there it is. On a scope, there's your sine wave. There are coils. Put a voltage on them just to get them running. Very low voltage. And on the true law, these are just magnets. These aren't this isn't the true law of the squares SEG. On the true law of the squares SEG, if you put probes on the inner neodymium layer, that's positive, and the outer copper layer or aluminum layer, which is negative, you will show a voltage deflection on your needle of anywhere from 3 to 14 volts. So that's more than enough EMF to get everything rotating at a very fast speed. And nominal voltage on the SEG is about 100,000 volts. Now, what you have is a field of ions, negative ions, outflowing from the generator when it's rotating. And at higher levels, you'll get a vacuum, constantly expanding. The vacuum envelope is around the craft also when it's in flight in the air. No air can come near it. Anything over 500,000 to 1 million volts, and that's on the very low side of SEG-powered idle. Now, there's an easier to see diagram also. Now, nominal SEG, 3 concentric rings or plates, and 3 concentric sets of runners. Inner runner set must be at least 12, and the runners are made of 8 stacked discs. That's how they work. There's the SEG, Searle effect generator, one of the original free energy generators. We like to think of Professor Searle as the godfather of free energy. He's just an amazing man. Talk to him at length. He's just the nicest, smartest man you'd ever want to meet. There's the SEG for domestic use. You have pickup coils. Now, in any generator, you can either, to generate electricity, either move the magnet field or the conductor to cut lines of magnetic force to generate electricity. This is a converter. This converts the ambient energy that's all around us into usable torque and electricity. All the power you want in our universe. There it is for home use. We can have this. And there's some ferrite SEGs that generate high torque. And there's a letter from Mr. George Eulig, who's a major in the United States Air Force Engineering Division. And it says, one of our Air Force organizations in the States has requested a copy of a report apparently authored by you entitled Disc Shape of Flying Craft. If it's possible, send me a copy of the report at no charge to the government. I would appreciate it. So that's from 1976, 15 June. There's the flying craft. They were called levity discs way back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Without the disc body, which is a flight frame for control, you will lose the craft to space. The Earth just repels it with irresistible force. There's no way to control it. These flight cells help you control the craft, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. Now, here's a 30, 35 meter flying jet fighter. There's a pilot seat, discharge pin. Electrons like to be discharged from sharp points, and they adhere to curved surfaces. In this craft configuration, electrodynamic craft, artificial gravity craft, you want to eject electrons from the rim and have them rotate. There are about 2 or 3 different kinds of rotating fields. Now, there's the large version of the SEG, Searle effect generator, on board the craft for clarity. See, what happens when you overload the SEG, and what happens is very, very interesting with this type of magnetic motor. Really all generators, when you put a load on them, they slow down and heat up. Well, the opposite things happens with the SEG. When you put a load on it, it gets colder, and it speeds up, and it gets lighter, because the electron flux actually flowing radially through the SEG. That doesn't happen in normal systems. It's a condition of negative resistance. Negative resistance produces cold instead of heat. And T. Henry Moray found that out with his converter back in the 1930s and 20s. These are flight cells, flight control cells. They control the SEG from the outside. Rim discharge pins. 64 struts nominally. Here are the struts. And I think the battery is going in this laser, unfortunately, to use my weaker red one. So 64 struts form the structure of the craft. There's another cross-section. You can see framework very nicely there. I'll try to move along a little faster here. It's a very pleasing to the eye type of aerospace craft. This has no inertia. When it's at flight voltage, which is about 1 teravolt, it's probably a lot more than that. That's 10 to the 12 power volts. Whatever the power level, the current never exceeds 1.5 milliamps. So high energy electrostatics, as we know from subquantum kinetics, is the same thing as a gravity field. There's 1/2 G as measured on board the craft, and no feeling from inside, no matter what maneuvers, violent maneuvers you take. Multi-Mach flips and reversals and right angle turns, no problem. You don't feel a thing. You just feel 1/2 G gravity, half the weight you're suffering right now. There's one of the SEG models that's built. It's a framework, 64 struts. There's somebody working on the Demo 1. I think that's Gordon Goodfellow, working on the Demo 1 40 years ago in Berkshire, England, on land owned by the late Alfred Fleetwood. There's the 21-footer, the Demo 1, the last craft built, Demo 1. There's Tony Justice, Sue Justice, William T. Sherwood, and his wife Rhoda, who were also on team back in the day, 40 years ago. And there's the Demo 1 craft with clear shells nearing completion. And that was completed and flown like the 41 other craft before it. This white ring, this is the SEG housing. That's where the 3-ring SEG goes. It's powerful electrostatics. You have a rotating electrostatic field that comes off the rim, rotates electrons around the craft. Some of them are gathered back into the inner surface here. What forms in here is 1/2 G gravitational field. No matter what maneuvers, you don't feel a thing. They deliberately constructed it from the weakest material possible to detract the point that there'd be any forces on it. Once it's at flight voltage, you don't feel a thing, except 1/2 G onboard gravity. And there it is in various stages of construction. It's Professor Searle working on it. 64 struts, 64 flight cells. This is a flight cell area here, then a cold flame barrier on the rim. This is one of the ferrite sections being measured, and it has to be perfect in terms of uniformity, otherwise it will not work. Sue Justice standing on the almost completed Demo 1. It's an article from Hansenberg's Gazette, way back in the day, Professor Searle with a model. No noise, no pollution, no heat, no vibration, no consumption of Earth's oxygen. No need to carry fuel, no runways, no launch pad. We are the tomorrow people, the decision makers, tomorrow's transportation today. This is today's transportation. This is real. This is done. This is the P-11 flying in 1969. It was first flown in 1968. This has one of the really good control systems. Notice these flight cells here are open. You have 4 flight cell modes. Flight cell open, flight cell closed, flight cell open and locked, flight cell closed and locked. And Professor Searle explained to a young man from the press how it can stay there, just hang motionless against the wind. And 1968, this is the plan to develop such a vehicle for commercial use for deep space exploration. Who knows what the future may hold? It may still become reality, and it looks more and more like this is going to happen for all of us.